hello and welcome. My name is Asaf. I'm here with master drummer, Mr. Steve Smith. Steve, thank you so much for coming on the show.
All right, Asaf. Nice to be here. Thanks
Nice.
for the invitation.
Steve, I wanted you to start by telling the audience, I know that that has been covered in many of your other interviews. Can you tell us a little bit about your how you started with drums and music, but also focusing on the, I know that earlier on in your career, you also discovered Konnakol, or South Indian vocal percussion, and the whole thing about South Indian rhythm. So can you share with the audience about your beginnings and how did you get into South Indian rhythm?
Well, to start where I began, as a 9-year-old boy growing up in Massachusetts near Boston, I was attracted to the feeling and the sound of the snare drum and the bass drum that I would hear with marching bands. And back in those days, I'm not talking about drum corps, but literally, marching bands, whether they were high school marching bands that played at football games or just local marching bands, and I'd see them in a parade. And a combination of that, plus my parents had some jazz albums, for instance, Benny Goodman with Gene Krupa on drums. So it led me to wanting to play the drums. And actually, when I started in 1963, I started literally with just a pair of sticks and a practice pad and a private tutor. My parents were smart enough to know that I should have a private teacher, so I went for a weekly lesson. So my background is I started learning how to read music from the very beginning. I learned traditional grip. I learned molar technique, and my teacher, he was probably in his 50s or 60s in the 1960s, so he had done a fair amount of study himself. George Lawrence Stone was in Boston and a big influence on all the teachers. So in a way, I came out of that tradition, and my interest was not rock and roll, it was jazz. I was really involved with big bands, and I got to see pretty much all of the big bands live, from Count Basie to Stan Kenton and Woody Herman and Buddy Rich and Maynard Ferguson and Harry James, and even though a lot of my friends were into rock and roll and had discovered the Beatles and the Stones, I was in another direction altogether. And eventually I started to get interested in rock and roll, but that didn't happen until the late 60s, when I heard Jimi Hendrix and then Cream and finally Led Zeppelin. And one of the reasons I could relate to that music, let's say, more than I could the Stones and the Beatles in their early years, was simply because those drummers sounded like jazz drummers to me. And I could really relate to Mitch Mitchell or Ginger Baker or John Bonham or Ian Pace with Deep Purple. And so then I started buying rock records, and essentially I took my lessons every week. I was learning how to play the drum set in a way that was taught in those years. And in a lot of ways, a drum set is still taught in similar ways, where once I got some foundation with reading and stick control, we moved into the Jim Chapin four-way coordination, the independence for the modern drummer, and then using the syncopation book to learn independence between a jazz ride cymbal and the left hand on the snare, right foot on the bass drum, things like that. So my background is that more of a swing player, a jazz player. Then I was playing in both big bands and rock, garage rock bands, and I was being hired. I was during my high school years, I was able to join the Musicians Union, which meant that I could be hired to work in various orchestras or circus bands or all kinds of situations like that. So my background is is varied, which gave me the ability to play almost any kind of music that was coming along. And so since when I graduated high school in 1972 and went to the Berklee College of Music, if you put yourself back into those years, that was the very beginning of what later became known as fusion, but the vanguard of jazz at that time, the front line, were the people that had just left Miles Davis's group. And people like Tony Williams and Herbie Hancock and Wayne Shorter and Joe Zawinul, and then the next wave of Europeans that came over, like Jan Hammer and Miroslav Vitus. And so during my senior year in high school and then first couple of years at Berklee, what was going on in jazz was Weather Report, was Mahavishnu Orchestra, was then Return to Forever, the first version with Airto and Stanley Clarke and Flora Purim, and then the second version of Return to Forever with Lenny White, first Bill Connors, then Al Di Meola, and Tony Williams' Lifetime, and then Tony Williams' New Lifetime with Alan Holdsworth. So this is what I was seeing in my early years of Berklee, and growing up playing jazz and big band and garage band. This was the most natural kind of music for me to relate to. Like I could go to any extreme of like, okay, play rock, play big band, or play this new kind of jazz that we call jazz rock.
Jazz rock.
But later people call it fusion. So it came very naturally to play all of that music. So my background prepared me to pretty much do anything that came my way musically. Then I found that all I had to do was adapt my concept to be able to play the music that was presented to me. So in 1972, when I was a freshman at Berklee College of Music, Gary Chafee had just joined the staff to teach at Berklee. And Gary Chafee is the one that introduced me to his whole concept that he was just developing at that time of odd groupings, as he called them, phrases of 5, phrases of 7, phrases of 9, and the sticking patterns he would use in order to play those rhythms. So I was introduced to that in 1972. I studied with Gary from 72 to 73. 73 to 74, I studied with Alan Dawson, so I took a different direction, but that furthered my jazz studies. And then after that, I came back to study another year with Gary Chafee. At that point, Vinnie Colaiuta was also a student at Berklee, and Vinnie and I would study with Gary together. So instead of each of us having a 30-minute lesson, we decided that we would study with Gary together and have a 60-minute lesson as more or less a group lesson. Yeah. So during that year, Vinny and I we'd practice a lot together. We'd go see the shows, Billy Cobham's first band, Crosswinds. We saw Tony Williams with Alan Holdsworth, or Larry Coryell's The 11th House. And so those years were extremely formative in developing this kind of rhythmic dexterity and a way of playing those rhythms, meaning the Gary Chafee method of stickings, which is extremely useful for having those rhythms feel comfortable to play.
Yeah. So
now fast forward to 2001. So this is 1975. 76 is when I left Berklee because I ended up auditioning for Jean-Luc Ponty, and I got a gig with Jean-Luc Ponty. So I left school in my 7th semester to go on tour with Jean-Luc, and I played with him in late 76 and all of 1977, recording that album, Enigmatic Ocean, having these abilities to to play the odd rhythms was extremely important for Jean-Luc's music, because he had a lot of odd phrases and odd time signatures in his music. So all that, came together in that group. And then, of course, I played with Journey after that, Steps Ahead, my own group, Vital Information. And then I started making records for a label called Tone Center in 1997. And in the course of making 16, I ended up producing and writing and playing on 16 different albums for that label. I had made a recording with Jerry Goodman, the violinist from the Mahavishnu Orchestra, and Howard Levy. Howard Levy being the great keyboard player and harmonica player from Bela Fleck and the Flecktones. So we made an album that's actually pretty great album. It's called The Stranger's Hand, and we had Oteil Burbridge on bass. So during the process of making that record, that was, high level fusion with a lot of odd time signatures and reading. The guys brought in charts. And during 2001, Howard Levy and Jerry Goodman were doing a tour with a tabla player, and they needed a drummer. And so they hired me. And Howard had taken rhythmic dictation from the tabla player to write the charts. And they were extremely hard to read, because every measure was a different time signature. And it was Indian sounding music, that it had this sound of Hindustani, North Indian sounding rhythms and music. But yet the way Howard transcribed it, he didn't have the background of really understanding the phrasing. So he wrote literally every phrase as a different time signature. So we ended up doing some touring with that group. And after a while, I could see, hey, Howard, this tune that you wrote that has 3 bars of 7 and then, 3 bars of 5. And then
I see where this is going. Yeah.
It's actually, this is in 4. But it took me a while to figure that out. Yeah. And then finally he could see it too, and some of the tunes were definitely in odd time signatures, but that's what got me interested. That I could see there was some kind of logic that I did not understand, that this, how these rhythms were working together. And so the next year, 2002, I was teaching at a drum camp in Bavaria called Rhythm. I don't know if you know that Hakim Luden runs that camp, and I've taught there with everyone from Dave Weckl to Jeff Hamilton and Thomas Lang, and all kinds of drummers would be teaching there, and it was a week-long drum camp. And there was a teacher from South India named Karuna Murthy, and Karuna plays tabla. And so he had a class, an after-hours class. So we would, the teachers that were teaching drum set, and that year, Richie Garcia was teaching percussion, and Chad Wackerman was teaching drum set. I was teaching drum set. So, we teach 3 hours in the morning and 3 hours in the afternoon, and then we were off by 5 o'clock. Well, that's when Karuna had his class. So we all went to his class. It was like an after-hours class. And I went for 6 days in a row. And that was my introduction to South Indian, rhythmic concept using Konnakol.
Yeah.
And of course, I wasn't studying tabla. I was just studying the rhythms and the Konnakol. So I would film some of the lessons on a little video recorder. I would write down the rhythms the best that I could to remember them, write down the syllables. And I was fascinated by the construction, the logic, let's say the beauty of the rhythmic logic and the beauty of it. And then knowing how to practice just from years of study, and knowing and trusting if I do a little bit every day, it will come. I just did a little bit every day and practiced my Konnakol, and then eventually married it up to the drumming. So at first I did the Konnakol just on its own. I could play a lot of the rhythms without doing the Konnakol, like certain rhythms. For instance, I know, like, here's a rhythm, and it's a very common one. And when Karuna taught us rhythms, he would teach us in a way what I call like the jazz standards of South Indian korvais. Meaning, like, you know, jazz musicians can get together and they have a common vocabulary, common language. Let's play Autumn Leaves, and everyone knows Autumn Leaves. And Karuna taught us, you know, so for instance, and that's like a real basic composition. I couldn't do the Konnakol in those years, but I could play it. I figured out how to play it using the stickings, either chafy stickings or just straight rudimental stickings, paradiddles, double paradiddles, things like that, paradiddle diddles. They all worked very well. I didn't play them single stroke, which I see a lot of drummers from South India play things single stroke because they're not familiar with the rudiment. So it makes it much harder to play those. And they don't quite have the phrasing roll off that has like right, left, left. Like that. So
like a 6-stroke roll, yeah.
So that's how I put that, you know, so I just started practicing the Konnakol. Then I came up with two systems of doing it, two ways of doing it. One, keeping a groove and reciting Konnakol over the groove. And then the other is Konnakol and doubling the Konnakol with the drums unison. So there's two different approaches, and each one has, you know, taken some time to develop. So it wasn't it. So 2002, I got introduced to it. By 2003, I had played a gig with Larry Coryell, George Brooks, and Kai Eckhart, just like a local jazz gig in the San Francisco area where I lived at that time. And George Brooks, I had never met him or played with him until that point. He is a specialist of combining Western jazz with Indian melody, raga, and rhythm. And he was just starting to get deep into it, and had contacted Zakir Hussain, who he'd done a lot of work with. And George asked me if I wanted to be in a group with Zakir, which, of course, I knew about Zakir from Shakti. We had actually played together on an album called Yo Miles, but I had no interaction with him when it came to the actual Indian rhythms. It was just as a rhythm section in a jazz fusion group. So, but I, you know, of course, loved Shakti and loved what I had heard of Zakir. So I said, yeah, I'm in. So that group is called George Brooks Summit. So that started in 2003 with Fareed Haq on guitar, Kai Eckhart on bass, George on sax, me on drums, and Zakir on tabla. During the year that I played with Howard Levy and Jerry with the tabla player, I had devised a drum set that I could play with a tabla player and I wouldn't blow him out of the water with volume. Yeah, but I came up with a Sonar jungle kit, had a 16-inch bass drum, a little, you know, 10-inch tom and a 13-inch floor tom, a tiny snare drum, flat ride cymbals, 2 flats, and like 12-inch hi-hats, a little splash cymbal, and then I used bundles, which later evolved into my talawans. And so Zakir was not used to that, you know, that we could actually play, and my volume, of course, he would still be mic'd, but it wasn't like the volume of a whole drum set played with sticks.
Yes.
And I would play with brushes, but then to play the faster stuff, I'd need the bundles, and then for the clarity. Yes. So that group, we played a lot of gigs around the world. We made a really nice album. And when you're on tour with Zakir and a group like that, it's a lesson every day. You know, definitely like lessons every day. After the gig, like what happened here, let's work on this. He would teach us various korvais. Now, he is an expert in Hindustani, North Indian rhythms, but he also is an expert in Carnatic South Indian rhythms by virtue of his association with Viku Vinayakaram and his time with Shakti. And then, he's got the rhythmic aptitude to then absorb whatever the concept is that he's involved in, whether it's playing with Mickey Hart and Planet Drum or the Grateful Dead and rock and roll, or playing jazz and swing with Charles Lloyd or all the people he's played with over the years. He's a pretty inspirational figure to spend time with. So during those years, that was taking it way up a lot of notches, because then it wasn't just practicing on my own, it was learning something in the afternoon and then being put on the spot that night. We are going to play this. And in front of 1,000 people, if I messed it up, he would just make me play it again until I got it right. So trial by fire, seriously, yes. Trial by fire. But that, that kind of approach is demanding. It's like old school. This is how we're going to develop our ability. So that, and then I started to meet other musicians that further tutored me, like Pete Lockett. I got to spend time with Pete Lockett, and he's been a mentor and a teacher, and we've played together. And then eventually Selva Ganesh, and I toured and played with Prasanna quite a bit, who's a Carnatic guitarist.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, that knows a lot about, he's, very well versed in South Indian rhythms, and to play his music, I needed to learn a lot of different rhythmic concepts just to be able to improvise with him and catch the T highs, let's say, at the end of phrases and stuff. So all in all, it's like learning any kind of music. You have to get some foundation. And like I go back to my, first years of just getting jazz coordination, jazz foundation. But then the way you really play the music is to do it, is to simply get involved with people that are living and breathing that music. And then you learn on the job. And that's essentially what happened with my story of learning Konnakol, which then translated into Indian rhythms, playing with Indian musicians, but then has the further benefit of expanding my rhythmic repertoire to the point where I'm faced with difficult music, like, for instance, 2011, 12, 13, I was subbing for Simon Phillips with Hiromi and the Trio Project with Anthony Jackson. Very difficult music with a lot of odd time signatures, odd phrases. And I found that knowing Konnakol and thinking of the rhythms in the way that I was thinking of them in being introduced to this whole rhythmic aspect from India, it made that music a lot easier than, let's say, had I not had that background. I could think of the rhythms in terms of not just, here's a bar of 7. It's a takadimi, takita, takadimi, takita, takadimi, takita, takadimi, takataki da, or whatever, whatever the phrase would be. I would think of it like that, which would make it flow for me and much easier to play.
Yeah, just something interesting personally for me. Is you are mentioning starting to vocalize the syllables first, and then getting onto the drums, and then performing, and then really kind of going for it on the gigs, learning something and then doing it. In the process of all that, did you feel that your rhythmic perception increased, or how should I say, would you say that Konnakol has enriched your rhythmic life in the sense that when you play whatever else you play, so for instance, if you play a gig with Journey, you might not play korvais, but do you feel that there is any change in your rhythmic perception when you play other styles of music?
Knowing the Konnakol, which is then knowing rhythm, the Indian rhythms, and then let's say just the Indian concept of how to work with the rhythms, how to phrase them in 4 or 8 bar or 16 bar phrases. That's helped me in every aspect now of whether it's playing the journey music or whether it's playing with steps ahead, jazz, straight ahead jazz. Any kind of situation has been enhanced with knowing and incorporating those rhythms. And so it's not so much that let's say it's enhanced my time feel or anything like that, though in some ways I'm sure that it has, but it's just enhanced my rhythmic awareness, the rhythmic awareness and how, and how to phrase over long, and like, for instance, when I say how to phrase over long forms, I really am more aware of like ending things with T-highs, for example. Even if I'm playing in a jazz trio and we're playing an up-tempo standard and I'm trading 8s and then trading 4s and 2s, a lot of times now what I end up playing, naturally it comes out that I'll end my phrase with some kind of T-high.
Yeah.
Not all the time, but it's there. Now it's an option. It's an option now.
Yes. Fantastic. And you mentioned earlier, the tawil, which is, for anyone who doesn't know what tawil is, please go and check that out, because it's such a beautiful instrument. It's a very loud instrument. It's meant to play in open air temple kind of music, religious ceremonies and weddings and so on. And the tawil actually sounds a little bit like a drum kit, more so than the other percussion instrument in the south of India, like the mridangam or the gatam. It's got a definite bass, almost like a bass drum, and a different a slap kind of sound, which is, you can say, a bit like a snare drum.
That's right. So when I played with Karunamurthy, the tawil player on the drum set, yeah, it wasn't a requirement to play at an extremely low level, because the tawil is the loudest of all the Indian drums. So the left, it's a barrel drum, like this big. With the left hand, he plays with a stick, like with this, and then the right hand, there's these little caps that you put on your fingertips, so it's very loud on this side, and very loud. So yeah, outdoor drum versus an indoor drum.
Yes.
And on the other hand, though, when you're exposed to then playing with a tabla player or even kanchira player, those instruments are extremely quiet, and it's hard for drummers to relate to, because we think of quiet as maybe playing with an acoustic bass and an acoustic piano with brushes. But an acoustic piano itself would be so loud, it would drown out the sound of a tabla. So those instruments are extremely sensitive. But all that music does work together, because if you're playing with a sitar and a tabla, those two resonate and sound volume-wise, they complement each other very well. So introducing Western instruments into that world, it really requires like this give and take to find a way dynamically to balance with that.
Yeah, and you've spoken about that subtlety of the percussion instrument, especially the mridangam or the tabla, which are, when you hear them on a gig, you'd say, okay, it sounds like a instrument with some volume, but when you actually, as a drummer, when you actually play with a mridangam or a tabla, you really have to be careful if there's no amplification. My question is actually about something else, maybe a little bit more on the technical side. I know that you spoke a little bit about the element of inserting sticking patterns into the South Indian rhythms. But could you tell the viewers, what is your approach to translating those rhythms to the drums, and especially considering, as you said, that subtlety of the percussion instrument, a lot of these rhythms, they sound really very well on those very delicate instruments. What is your approach to, preserving that, that beauty and rhythmic story, so to speak, on the drums?
Well, I have a lot of different ways of playing the rhythms and various sticking patterns. I would say to start with, I focus on a group of three, because if we break down the rhythms, essentially we're talking about twos and threes, and so just say a group of three. Takita, takita, ta. My sticking pattern would be right, left, left. Takita, takita, takita. That leaves my right hand could move around to various toms, takita, takita, takita. And so the first embellishment, I would say, that a kanjira player would do, and I say a lot of what I do comes a lot from kanjira. They're going to play takita tom. Yeah, takita, 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 takita. So that would, I keep the right, left, left, takita, tak. And then I have the kita tom here. Takita, 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 for seven. Takadimi, takita, takadimi, takita, takadimi, takita, takadimi, takita, takadimi, takita, takadimi, takita. So that got me, that's a beginning point. So I've worked various ways of phrasing the rhythms between the hands and the feet, or just the hands, and then, being able to move them around a kit. Yeah. In a way that when I play in unison with a tabla player or a mridangam player, kanjira player, we can really connect with the phrasing. And we're in sync.
Yes, yeah. It's also a matter of sound as well. Those specific stickings that you were showing me earlier have a sound, and as you said earlier, if you do everything as a single stroke like that, it's going to have a specific sound. It's going to sound a little bit, how should I say, harsh and very dramistic, so to speak, and maybe lose a little bit of that subtlety of the percussion instrument.
So it's just those kind of stickings came to me almost instantaneously, and that's just because of the years of the training.
Yeah, with Gary Chaffee, I guess you've done some.
Well, those are those actually, they're just more like just straight ahead rudiments. So it's a combination of the Gary Chaffee stickings plus just straight ahead basic rudimental paradiddle variations.
I think in many ways we as drummers, and especially those of us who try to learn Konnakol and learn South Indian rhythm, have to kind of reinvent our instrument a little bit and kind of readjust to that language, and kind of I find that every drummer finds a little bit of a different way to express those rhythms on the drums, and it's interesting, but it's also quite difficult, if you're coming from it like this, just the talas, the compositions. Now you have to really put it on the drums. What do you do? How do you make it? So you have to just experiment and find your own way, I guess.
I think that's really what's interesting, part of what's interesting about it right now. Yeah. It is a new kind of idea, and people are solving those issues or solving those problems with their own unique approaches. So it is an interesting new frontier.
Yeah, it's exciting. Yeah. I wanted to ask you, in case you have something, a Konnakol composition that you like, or a Konnakol composition that you are working on at the moment, would you mind sharing this with us?
I have a reduction sequence that I like to use. 777-666-555-444-333-222-111, and then a gap. And if we think of those numbers as 16th notes, the gap is 2 16th notes. One note that you play, and then the second 16th note is a rest or a breath. And that sequence is repeated 3 times, and it comes to the 1 after 64 beats. So I'll recite just the numbers so you can hear the mathematics of this. And I have my metronome set at 80 beats, and quarter note equals 80, and sounds like this. Recite that for you, and every 32 beats there's an accent. So you'll hear that accent in the middle, and then you'll hear it at the end when this entire sequence finishes. So 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 1 2 3 4 5 6 1 2 3 4 5 6 1 2 3 4 5 6 1 2 3 4 5 1 2 3 4 5 1 2 3 4 5 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 1 1 1 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 1 2 3 4 5 6 1 2 3 4 5 6 1 2 3 4 5 6 1 2 3 4 5 1 2 3 4 5 1 2 3 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 1 1 1 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 1 2 3 4 5 6 1 2 3 4 5 6 1 2 3 4 5 6 1 2 3 4 5 3 4 5 1 2 3 4 5 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 1 1 1. So you can make that a basic Konnakol composition. If we now, instead of reciting numbers, we use some basic Konnakol syllables. So that sounds like this. Oh, I'm going to speed it up a little bit. 85, let's see. All right, here we go. Taka dimmy taki the taka dimmy taki the taka dimmy taki the 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 taka taki the taka taki the taka taki the taka dimmy taka dimmy taka dim taki the taki the taki the taka 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 do 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 da taka dimmy taki the taka dimmy taki the taka dimmy taki the taki the taki the taki the taki the taki the taka taki the taka taki the taka taki the taka dimmy taka dimmy taka dimmy taki the taki the taki the taka 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 taki dum taka dimmy taki the taka dimmy taki the dimmy taki the 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 taka taki the taka taki the taka taki the taka dimmy taka dimmy taki the taki the taki the taka 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 do 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 da. So now we can change it up more, make it a more interesting Konnakol composition, and I'm going to base the embellishments that I'm going to use off of an embellished 5. Taka takita dum, where I take the 3 and instead of going takita, it's takita tom, right, left, if I'm going to play it, and I'll play it for you after this, and like I talked about earlier. So I'm going to insert the 5 even in the 7. So the 7 is going to be like a 5, but with 2 16ths in front of it. Dum taka taka dum dum taka taka dum 1 2 1 2 3 4 5 1 1 2 3 4 5, and the 6 dum taka taka dum 1 1 2 3 4 5 1 1 2 3 4 5. So it's a little tricky, but it sounds cool. So that's what. And then the 4 will be ta taka dum 3 taka dum the 2 dum 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 da, and that sounds like this. Dum taka taka dum 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 taka taka dum taka taka dum taka taka dum 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 da dum taka taka dum 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 taka taka dum taka taka dum taka taka dum 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 da dum taka taka dum 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 taka taka dum taka taka dum taka taka dum 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 da. And I'll play that for you. 2, 3. Boom, taka, taka, 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 boom, taka, taka, boom, taka, Here's another variation on that same reduction sequence. And now for the embellishment of the 3 is doom taka terikitatum, doom taka terikitatum. So I'm sticking that left, right, that group of 3. Instead of 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, or 1 kitatum, tak kitatum. Now it's terikitatum, 1, 2, 3. Left, right. So the 7 will sound like doom taka terikitatum, and so forth. So I'll recite that for you. Also, again, the metronome is it. Quarter note equals 85. Doom taka terikitatum, 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 taka terikitatum, taka terikitatum, taka terikitatum, 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 kitatum, 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 dum 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 da, doom taka terikitatum, 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 taka terikitatum, taka terikitatum, taka terikitatum, 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 kitatum, 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 dum 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 da, doom taka terikitatum, 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 taka terikitatum, taka terikitatum, taka terikitatum, 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 kitatum, 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 dum 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 da. And now I'll play that for you on the pad. 1, 2, 3. Boom, taka terikitatum, 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 And finally, I'll play 2 different interpretations on the drum set. The first one using a Tony Williams inspired sticking phrase, and the second one incorporating double bass drum.